Hey everyone, welcome to Comics with Bueller. As always, I am Bueller. Today we're going to be talking about a great new book, and we have some guests with us, the creators of the book. We have Blacky Shepherd. How you doing today?
I'm doing real well, man. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I'm excited to have you on the channel, and you're not here alone. You have none other than Cullen Bunn. Cullen Bunn, how you doing today as well?
I'm doing I can't complain.
We're here to talk about you guys' new Kickstarter campaign. I'd like to jump right in to what our topic is. And we're going to be talking about this new book that you guys coming out. This is volume 2, if I'm not mistaken. This is H.P. Lovecraft Reanimator, The Eternal Lie, Part 2. And let me just throw it to both of you guys and hear your elevator pitch for this book that's going to be coming out.
I'll defer to Cullen. He's got the best pitch of the two of us.
So, Reanimator, The Eternal Lie is a direct sequel to the original H.P. Lovecraft short story that was written years and years and years ago. And it follows Herbert West, the infamous Reanimator, and we find that his reanimation serum has been stolen. And the forces that have stolen this reanimation serum want it for beyond nefarious purposes. They have extremely nefarious purposes for this, and they are going to be using it for something that is awful. Herbert West wants to get his reanimation serum back and stop them.
I think my cat can hear yours in the background. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone.
That's all right. That's real life right there. That's awesome.
The screeching cat.
Well, it's kind of fitting given that HP was a cat person. I guess we're in the spirit. And also, oddly enough, today is the anniversary of HP's death in 1937. He died on March 15th, 1937.
No, I did not know that. I'm not too much of a historian on him myself. I did get to read the first volume of this just the other day. I really enjoy it. So pretty much, volume 2, does it start right after volume 1?
Yeah, volume 2 picks up right where number 1 left off. And for those who haven't read volume 1, the good news is the Kickstarter campaign, you can grab that first volume at the same time, so you have plenty of opportunity to read both volumes.
And Blacky, you worked on volume 1 as well. You were the artist for that one. You're obviously the artist for volume 2. When you saw the scripts that Cullen was bringing you, I mean, did you get excited? I mean, I know you're a big horror fan. Obviously, Cullen is well known for a lot of horror books and a lot of other books. I mean, literally, you can make a comic shop based on all the books that Cullen has written. It wouldn't be out of the range there. But what do you think when you got your hands on the scripts?
Well, so when I got the script for the first volume, I didn't really know what to expect going in. Cullen and I had talked just a little bit about it. I knew the bare bones of it, that it was going to be a Reanimator story and that he wanted to draw Herbert West into the larger, H.P. Lovecraft mythos. But that was really about it. Now we had worked on the character once before, for a comic called Vampirella versus Reanimator. But that was set in a kind of a different timeline. It's much more updated, given that that Vampirella is a contemporary character, so to speak. So when I got the first script, I was really into it. I say this a lot, but I'm a big fan of Cullen's horror, right? So reading the script, it was just kind of like every couple of pages, especially with that first volume, and it's true of the second volume as well. At least every second page, there was something where I was going, "Oh, that's rad." And then I, look at it and go, "Ah, that's good. That's so rad," and so it just kept getting radder and radder and radder until, the end, when it ends on, the raddest of all time, cliffhanger. And so there was a big gap after the first volume finished, and we got to work on the second volume. And so I was really keen to know, kind of what happens, you know, from the setup of the first volume. And so when I got the script for the second volume, I kind of just blazed through it to try to figure out, you know, kind of where everybody winds up and who makes it and who doesn't. And, you know, that,
You skipped to the end there.
yeah, yeah. And so it again, it was just one of those things where you know, every couple of pages are like, oh, that's so cool, you know? So I guess it's hard for me to talk about it objectively because I'm such a fan of horror in general,
Yeah.
Reanimator particularly, and Cullen's work particularly. So it's, you know, it's hard to talk about it and not gush and sound kind of like an idiot, you know.
I always like the relationship between an artist and a writer. Colin, when you see his work come back to you after you've written the story and you've got the script and you see these pages come back, and they're very well done. I looked at a bunch of the artwork. I just love it. Do you feel as though he's already telling the story for you? Because I always look at a comic book that you can look at a comic book and you can just look at the pictures and it should be able to tell the story. I noticed that his does that for your story.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe with this project more than in a lot of projects. And Blacky, correct me if I'm wrong. I can't remember how I scripted the first one, but this part 2, I scripted it in what you'd call the Marvel style, which is
I think you did the first volume in that way as well.
I did. Okay, so we did the first and second volume, and that was really by Blacky's request, and our timeline, or the timelines were such that we needed to get Blacky working as quick as possible, and that was a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not familiar with the old Marvel style, it's really, I write most of my scripts, 99% of my scripts, I write panel by panel. This is what happens in the panel. This is what the characters say. Panels, you know, and I really write it out. In the Marvel style, you're really, and I don't know if it has another name. I've always called it Marvel style. Yeah. You write like just the description of what's going to happen on the page, and the artist just goes and does that. And then I go back in once the art is complete, and I write all the captions and all the dialogue and everything like that. It's how comics were written way back in the day. I'm going to be completely honest. I hate it. I'm too much of a control freak, and it drives me crazy doing it that way. But Blacky, I mean, he nailed it. I mean, these pages look amazing. The storytelling's there. I mean, I worry a lot of times if I've ever, you know, I think I've done this. I've done 4 scripts this way. And every time I've done one, I get nervous that, oh, this is going to be a disaster of a comic. And I should have just had faith in Blacky to do the work and do it the right way, but because it looks gorgeous. It's the storytelling's there. And what's even more exciting for me is some of his creature designs are some of the coolest creature designs I've ever seen. There's a moment in the first volume that I don't even remember how I described the creature in the script, but I think I probably said, but let's make it different than we've ever seen before. And holy cow, it is bizarre in the best, most horrible, disgusting ways. And that's still my favorite page in that issue. But yeah, his designs are great. Storytelling's great. I mean, no exaggeration. I feel like he does a lot of the heavy lifting on this one by the nature of how those scripts are written.
Yeah, we got to give those artists a lot of credit, you know, because this isn't the 90s anymore. The Hollywood artists, you know, going on Arsenio Hall or The Late Show, that just doesn't happen these days. So, Blacky, I thought you did a great job, man. I loved it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is all very nice of both of you to say. You know, one of the things that has always been very important to me is kind of exactly what you were talking about, Bueller, which is, for me, it's very important that a person be able to look at the art and, without reading a word, be able to get an idea of not only what's going on, but what's being said, what's going on in the character's mind. Yeah. You know, so I spend a lot of time on faces, you know, and trying to, you know, I try to do some acting through the characters, you know, so that, you know, the art is a better vehicle for the text, you know, because one of the things that always bothered me, especially in the 90s, which I'm not fond of as an era for comics, is that a lot of times the faces, unless the text was there, you had no idea what was going on in this person's head. You know, it was just kind of stoic face, excited face, stoic face, you know.
That's how we make thumbnails for YouTube videos.
Right. Right.
Just like that. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. You know, I saw the artwork on there. I read the story, like I said just a little bit ago. Thought for the first volume, really liked it. Really easy to follow along. When I was younger, you know, I just looked at the pictures of the books. I didn't read the books. You know, I was like 5, 6 years old. As I got a little older, I started going back and reading those books. But the first thing that caught my attention was obviously the cover and then the pictures inside. And the pictures in my mind told the story. And then I went back and read it, and it's pretty much very identical to what I thought it was. So when you see that transition between the two, and the artwork tells a story, what the story tells as well, it's a good combination. I think you guys did a great job.
Well, I think in the best of all possible worlds, you know, the artist and the writer are working in unison and tandem to get to the same place, you know, to make sure that the story is fully told in its entirety, you know, that nothing is left on the table, as it were. You know, and you know, I keep talking about the 90s, but they were such a good example in my mind of what was wrong with comics, you know, because you know, you got to that point where the writing was so sparse because you were letting all these artists who were, in my opinion, sometimes questionable artists to begin with, do the writing as well, you know, and so
tell us names, Blacky. Name all the artists you hate.
I'll do it. Let's just say a lot of them should have been paying Arthur Adams royalties. But you know, but the writing was so sparse, and then the drawings were so overdone in some cases with just a bunch of extra lines and splash page that, you know, it drove me out of comics, but it also gave me a kind of a North Star about how not to make comics, you know.
Very nice. Well, you know, your guys' Kickstarter started about a week ago from right now. I believe it was about a week ago. Is it a 30-day campaign?
I think so, yeah.
It is.
Okay. And I saw there's multiple tiers on there for everything. There's things where you can just get the regular basic A cover. You can also get original art from the book as well, from what I've seen. And I saw that you're doing a cover that has one of my friends on there. His name is Robbie from Pop Philosophers. He's a really good friend of mine. And Cullen, I don't know if you've been on his channel or not. He's interviewed a lot of creators and stuff. But
I don't believe I have.
But
there are days when I don't know what I've done. Today's one of those days.
Well, let me ask you about that really quick, because when I go and I look at your list of books, it's a never-ending list. It doesn't stop. It takes up a lot of pages. I mean, you are a prolific writer. Are you ever writing a book and start to write another book in the meantime and get a little confused and mixed up?
I absolutely get confused from time to time, but usually I'm pretty good. I do such detailed outlines for the comics I'm writing, and then and when I'm actually scripting, that outline is sitting right in front of me, so it's kind of hard to get too mixed up. But there are times where I'm thinking about a story and I'll be thinking whatever's going on, oh no, that's happening in a different book altogether,
or maybe it fits better in a different book or something like that, and switch it around.
Yeah, I mean, it's and honestly, that has happened. I have been working on one book, and a solution to a problem that I'm facing in another title surfaces on something I'm trying to do, and then I have to fix it. And then what happens more often is I find that I follow subconscious themes, things that must be on my mind, and I'll notice as I'm working on one book, then the other book will have similar themes. And I won't usually notice it until the books are on the shelf, and someone will come to me and say, "Hey, were you trying to talk about, this issue?"
Hmm.
I was like, well, I wasn't trying, but I guess in some way, I guess I was. So,
Yeah. Well, let me just take a little, give people a little example of some of the books that you've written. I mean, like I said, the list is long, so this is just a drop in the bucket. Obviously, we have Deadpool, we have Venom, we have Carnage, X-Men, Magneto. Those are the big Marvel titles. Some of the other titles, we have Punk Mambo, which is actually one of my favorites. Love the character on there and stuff.
that's awesome.
We have Harrow County as well. We have Bone Parish, another one I really enjoyed. I could never pronounce this name right. Basilisk.
Basilisk. You got it pretty good. That's pretty close. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I read that one and stuff. You wrote a bunch of Godzilla books as well. And then Six Gun is probably one of the books you're more known for as far as getting your name out there and stuff like that. But like I said, this is just a drop in the bucket. There's a lot more stuff that you've been involved with. But what can I, like, if I had a person come to me and ask me about comics and said, man, I heard about this Cullen Bunn guy, or I saw him on your channel, besides this new Kickstarter campaign that's coming out, what is the quintessential Cullen Bunn book that I should read?
So it's a great question. And typically when someone asks me that, I will tell them there are two books that I would point them to. I would point them to Harrow County and The Sixth Gun. And I feel like both of those books, they were longer runs for an independent book. It's kind of unheard of. You don't do that. Not many independent books go 50 plus issues in the case of The Sixth Gun and 30 plus issues in the case of Harrow County. But in both of those situations, I was able to tell that story. Look, forget false modesty. I'm no false modesty. I believe every issue of those two series is a winner. And I can't say that about everything I work on. I'm not that full of myself, but I do believe those two books, every issues are winners across the board. And I feel like they represent who I am. They represent the kind of stories I want to tell. And both of them were situations where the creative team was able to just tell the story we wanted to tell. And it wasn't, cut short. It wasn't changed by editorial mandate or publishing strategies changing. We did the stories we wanted to do, and we barreled through to the end on both of them.
That's great. Yeah, like I said,
outsider to that, if I could add a title to it, it would be Bone Parish. That is a strong favorite of mine. The first thing that I read by Cullen was The Sixth Gun, and then I think Harrow County was coming out just as we started doing our first work together. And so I was reading that, through the whole thing. But when Bone Parish came out, by that time, Harrow County was either finished or was winding down. And so I was looking for a new horror book, and Bone Parish is just, everything from Cullen's writing to the art. It just, for me, it's another one of those, like Sixth Gun and Harrow County, in my opinion, that fires on all cylinders. It's not a bad page in the series.
Well, thank you, Blake. You're all right. You're okay.
Hey, I try.
Yeah, Bone Parish is one of my favorites. Also, like I said, the Punk Mambo just struck me. I saw the cover on the shelf, and I just picked them all up, and I really enjoyed it. Just thought the character. I have a friend with a very similar look that she has in real life, so I had to get it. So that was one of my favorites. Blacky, your resume as well. Your resume is kind of like my after-school childhood. When I look at the stuff you worked on, I mean, we got G.I.JOE, we got Transformers, we got Voltron. These are all the shows I ran home to go to see, so I wouldn't miss it on after school or on Saturday morning. Is that on purpose, or were you just like, these are the jobs that are offered, or do you have a fondness for those characters? I mean, we all did. We all loved our cartoons.
That's kind of what I got offered. Voltron was my first real series. And I was really jazzed to get that because, much like you, for me, the market that I lived in, so in the morning, they would show at 7:30, they would show Voltron, the space series, and then, or the car Voltron. Then at 3:30, as I was getting home from school, they would show the Lion Voltron, right? So I was able to kind of see both of the series in unison to one another. And it was, you know, I'm a big fan of, you know, both kaiju and like old school kaiju and like Ultraman and the Shogun Warriors and, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, Voltron was right up my alley. And so to get to work on Voltron was just absolutely huge for me. And then let me see, I kind of, from Voltron, we did Pumpkinhead and you know, I started veering more into horror, but the editors at IDW, I actually just by accident at WonderCon ran into an editor from IDW while I was getting some prints made, and one of them was a Voltron print. And you know, he asked me about it, you know, and I told him about it and told him that I had worked on the series or whatever. And then they tapped me to do first a cover for G.I. Joe, and then they had me start doing the Transformers, which the Transformers was my jam as well, you know. I remember that first commercial, you know, for the Marvel comic. And I remember the bus ride home as I'm, you know, because I knew that day was when the cartoon was going to debut.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get the song out of my head. I was just jazzed to see it. And, you know, it was all downhill from there, you know. So getting to work on the Transformers was huge for me.
I don't think kids respect how painful those bus rides home in the afternoon could be. If there was a new show debuting or something. I mean, like the two of you, I rushed home for Star Blazers was the one I always missed. Like I'd miss the first 20 minutes of Star Blazers every day.
Star Blazers was I lived at that time, at that age, I lived in Oklahoma. So we were probably in the same market.
Yeah.
Because I was always getting the last, you know, 5 or 6 minutes of Star Blazers.
Yeah. But I also feel like if you were to pan Blacky's camera around, there's a veritable army of action figures all around him. I know this. And I'm certain that every character you just named, there's an action figure. And this guy, don't let him fool you. He gets these jobs and he's like, oh, I got to go buy some more G.I. Joes for reference.
So I did not intend to get back into collecting toys on a broad scale. But then when I got my first gig, well, first when I got Voltron, I had to buy the $300 bad boy, you know, 30th anniversary Voltron, you know, for reference. And then when I got the Transformers gig, I just started buying Transformers. Next thing you know, I'm fully in it again, you know.
So when you say reference, you're referring to Attack Side-Eye, correct?
Was going on was Showtime was taking the old like Guy King and Dangard Ace and cutting them up into like hour-long chunks and showing them on Showtime. And that was the other one that I would, you know, race home, you know, to catch on the.
I remember them.
I realized that I could run home faster than I could ride the bus and all the stops that they did. So about a month in the school, I was like, man, I can get home about 5 minutes before if I rode the bus because I stopped like 5 or 6 times. So I just book it as fast as I could to get the new G.I. Joe, or Thundercats was another one that I couldn't wait to see. So, but that was simpler times, and I miss that stuff. And now the nice thing is every episode of like G.I. Joe or Transformers is on YouTube. You can just go watch them anytime you want. So now, Cullen, you mentioned something about Blacky's office there and all the figures. You're not, I mean, let's be honest, you got stuff yourself, right? And as I was looking at a video of you showing your office tour, you showed one of my all-time favorite play sets, which is the Dungeons and Dragons green play set. I can't remember what it was called.
Bangs, right?
It's right up there above my head. Yeah.
Man, I was so envious to see that again because I played with that for hours and hours. When did you pick that up, or is this the original one from childhood?
I never had the Fortress of Fangs when I was a kid. I had a lot of the figures, but I never had the Fortress of Fangs. So that was one of those. As with many of the things I buy, it's I wanted this when I was a kid and I never got it, so I'm gonna get it now. So I've only had that for a few years, and yeah, if he's full of figures, I like set him up when I got it. I was like a kid. I was like, this is the room where the fire elemental lives, and it's a 2-inch square room, but I'm like, this is where this monster is going to dwell. So yeah, most of the toys I have, I call it the flea market of doom, because it's basically just a bunch of dusty old things that I find and love in various, it's all nostalgia, being beholden to nostalgia. But yeah, and I'm not a collector in that I don't worry so much about the condition of it necessarily, as long as it looks pretty good. So yeah, that's what all that stuff is behind me. It's just my flea market of doom.
Yeah, I love that. That was one of my favorite play sets I had, and I used to love the figures on that because they range from like 2 inches tall to like 8 inches tall. There's like giants and everything and stuff, and it was a fun play set. It was laid out like on a grid, like you said. There's little.
Well, get ready, Bueller. Get ready, because NECA is releasing revisions of all those action figures.
Oh,
and they are and they're gorgeous. So just be ready, because they're not cheap.
What's the dude with the blue helmet and the one that everybody likes?
Warduke.
Yeah. I've got him. He's on his way to me now.
Yeah, he was the first one, but it looks like they're going to be releasing a lot of them.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for them to re-release the USS Flag. I never had that. It was the
I don't know if that's going to happen. That would be a big play set, man.
It's ridiculous. Do you know how much that would cost these days? Because back in the day, wasn't it like $150? And people are like, this is the most expensive toy that's ever existed.
Yeah.
I've looked at them. I went to a couple comic shops in San Diego, and they had 2 of them on display. And I was like, oh man, if I just had the space, I might pull the trigger. And because it's the one I never had. G.I. Joe was my thing back then.
Yeah.
Never had room to get that, and I think back now, I think it was either $150. Now it's going to be $1,500.
Yeah, it's easy. It would be prohibitively expensive, I think.
But I don't need the microphone. They can keep the little microphone. That wasn't anything special that I wanted, so that you don't need to put that. So if that saves me a few dollars, I'll go ahead and let them keep the microphone. But that was one of the play sets I really wanted. I had the Master of the Universe one. I had the Dungeons and Dragons ones, which they kind of look similar, so I could play with them kind of together.
You can easily put Castle Grayskull, Snake Mountain, and the Fortress of Fangs in the same kind of genre,
very much so. But yours looked really clean. I was surprised. I looked at it, looked nice and clean. I did notice there was a couple little pieces missing on the little spikes that come off the ceiling or whatnot.
It's missing a couple of pieces that I could probably get off of eBay or have someone 3D print for me. I just haven't been I haven't been diligent about it. But yeah, it's some guy sold me that at a convention, or I think I was at a convention, and he had all the like PVC Dungeons and Dragons figures, and I bought everything. Nice. And then after I got home, he messaged me and said, "Oh, I also happen to have a Fortress of Fangs and some Shogun Warrior I'd never heard of." He says, "Would you like those as well?" Well, of course I do. So,
real quick, I have another quick question for you, Cullen. When you were very younger, you used to do Comic-Cons. You used to make your own books and sell them for 25 cents.
I did.
Have those books ever come back around? Has anyone ever come back to you and say, "Hey, I got this book when you were just a little kid and had asked for a signature"? Do they make their way back around? I mean, how many were sold?
I would probably wet myself if someone brought one of those books up. I can't imagine that anyone, so when I was in 5th grade, I wrote and drew a weekly comic that I gave out to all my friends. So it has a print run of 25 copies. I don't even have them anymore. That was called X Laser Nights. And then in just a little bit
with a Z, right? With a Z.
With a Z, because Z is cooler when it comes to laser. But then a few years later, I did set up at conventions, and I sold these books for a quarter a piece. And I don't know what the print runs of them are. I actually still have them. I still have the ones that I wrote and drew. But I do keep right over on my bulletin board. Back when I did it, there was a guy named Matt Fizel, and he did a comic called Cynical Man. It was all self-published. I think the biggest one he did a Zot 1/2 issue, and he wrote me a letter back when I was a kid telling me how much. So this was in, I don't even see the year, but anyway, 85. He wrote me this letter in 85 and just telling me how much he liked the comics and offered me a little bit of advice, told me what I should do when I was setting up at conventions. And I've kept this on my bulletin board ever since. He still sets up. I was in North Carolina at the time. I used to see him in North Carolina all the time. He still sets up at Heroes Con in North Carolina. And this is a prized possession for me, is just this little letter that Matt Fizel wrote me. He bothered to type a letter to me in 1985 and say, "Hey kid, not bad."
That's pretty great.
Yeah. Well, obviously your love of comics started at a very young age, from everything that you've done. Blacky, are you kind of the same way? Love of comics very young? I started when I was five years old.
Yeah.
I learned to read with comics. So my early childhood, I lived with my aunt and uncle and my cousins, and my cousin Mike would sit me down with the electric company, and the electric company always had that episode with Spider-Man on it, right? And that's how I learned to read. And then he had comics and would bring home comics and give them to me and help me figure them out. And so this is when I was like 3, so I learned to read pretty early from comic books. And then I grew up, my mom, single mother, worked all the time. I'm Generation X, so I was a latchkey kid,
Sure.
And so for me, I got a lot of my morals and worldview from comic books. Spider-Man is the reason I'm not a terrible person, know. And so I started reading comics probably at 3 or 4, and aside from that few years in the 90s, I've never not read comics.
That's awesome. This is a totally random question. I'm just going to throw this out there, and this is for both of you. Who is the favorite all-time professional wrestling manager?
Oh, Jimmy Hart.
James Cornette.
Yeah, Jimmy Hart. Come on.
You're going to go with Jim Cornette over Bobby the Brain Heenan?
Oh, yeah. 1,000 times Jim Cornette. I've told this story many times, but, we were big wrestling fans when I was a kid. And we went, it had to be a business trip because we never took trips unless it was a business trip, too.
Well, let me interrupt you. I'm assuming you started getting into wrestling well before WWF.
Yeah. This was NWA. And we went to this event in New Orleans at the Superdome it was the first tag team tournament of all the NWA or WCW, whatever it was called back then. All their stars were there, and it was a 3-day tag team tournament, and we went there. And I was a kid, and I walked in to our hotel, and there were all the wrestlers, and they were all standing around, and I was like, and I had my program book, and I went over to one of the good guy wrestlers, and I'm not going to say who it was. I went over to one of the good guy wrestlers, and he's like, "No, I don't have time for that right now. No, I'm not signing anything." And I was like, "Oh, dejected." And standing over in the corner were Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express, beautiful Bobby Eaton and whoever the other guy was. I can't think of his name. I'm sorry, but I can't think of his name. And Bobby Eaton looks over and says, "Hey, kid, come over here. I'll sign that book." And so I rushed over there and I had him sign. He had all these other bad guy wrestlers around. He's like, "Hey, come sign this kid's book." And they all signed a book. And I was the biggest bad guy fan from that day forward. I was all in on bad guys. I was already a little bit, but because I was a big fan of Nikita Koloff back then too. But so I was just all in on bad guys, and I've always loved the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette since that day. And I was at a convention a while back, and I told Bobby Eaton, he was there before he passed, and I told him that story, and he goes, "Ha, that sounds like something I'd do."
At least he owned it, right?
Yeah. So
as a kid, my favorite wrestler before WWF was Kerry Von Erich, I think, because I just thought he was just the coolest dude, and then my favorite team were the Thunderbirds. It was the Thunderbirds or the Freebirds.
Freebirds is
Freebirds.
Yeah.
And then it's been a minute. But then after WWF, pretty much around WrestleMania 3, when I got into it again, as a kid, I was all about like Jimmy Superfly Snuka and what's his name? Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
Yeah.
And I loved the rivalry between Ricky the Dragon and Macho Man, but yeah, I always loved Jimmy Hart. I just love the fact that he was such a little wimp,
Yeah. He had the megaphone. It was great. It was great.
I met Hacksaw Duggan at a convention, and he was the coolest guy. My table wasn't very far from his, and during a lull, I went over and I was like, "Hey man, I just wanted to say hi," and that kind of thing. And we started talking, and I felt like by the end of it, we were going to go have drinks and invite each other over to our houses and stuff
and get in a brawl.
Yeah,
with some fools.
Well, I lived in growing up in the Portland area in Oregon, so we had Portland wrestling. So we had Rowdy Roddy Piper was big, obviously, and Playboy Buddy Rose and Rip the Crippler Oliver, and just a few different guys and stuff. The nice thing was my father was a television producer, and he had a studio, so they would come to the studio to shoot all the promos and all the commercials. Nice. So I used to hang out at the studio and hang out with all these guys that are just larger than life, and they would kind of just shoo me away and stuff like that. But it was just so neat to see these guys turn the switch. It was like they're talking normal, then they turn the switch and it's like, "Hey, what's," and all this stuff.
What's going on, brother?
Exactly. It was like instant. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy." But especially watching Piper do his thing.
And we, there's long periods in the field where we'd have to keep each other entertained, and the way we kept each other entertained is we would WWF wrestle each other. And because I'm Scotch Irish, I was always Rowdy Roddy Piper.
There you go.
So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for that guy.
Yeah, great guy. You know what? They Live, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh yeah, great movie.
Yeah,
and Frogtown. If you're just looking for performance, Hell Comes to Frogtown and nothing to sneeze at.
That's a classic one as well. So, a couple other real quick things here. I was looking on my list here. I noticed that Cullen, you mentioned your father was a storyteller and he had a lot of stories. When you mentioned that in another interview, I figured about that movie called The Big Fish. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's kind of the grasp I took from it. My father was the same way. Like I just said, he was a television producer, a lot of stories, a lot of stuff like that. Would you say that is a direct influence for what you do today from what the storytelling that your father shared with you as growing up?
Yeah, for sure. He was and you mentioned Big Fish. By the way, one of my favorite movies, and I will never, ever watch it again because, I've watched it once. I'll never watch it again because I cry like, it's awful. I ugly cry at that movie because it is very similar to the way my dad lived his life.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched it at when anyway. I watched it the worst possible time to watch Big Fish, so I'll never watch it again. I love the movie, but it's one that it's a one-time watch. So yeah, and my dad was he was just a big influence. He wasn't a perfect guy, but he loved telling stories, and in a lot of ways, I really wish I was more like him because he was he never met anyone he couldn't talk to. So he talked to everybody, and he never met anybody he couldn't sell something to.
Yeah.
And, if he were still around, I'd bring him to conventions just to sell comics because he was just a natural born salesman, and he just wasn't afraid of anything. He wasn't afraid of how people would look at him. He wasn't afraid of any challenge life threw at him. And there, in a lot of ways, he did a lot of stuff that you don't aspire to be, but in a lot of ways, he did a lot of things that I would absolutely, I wish I could be like a little more like him in that way.
Yeah. I'd say my father was very similar. He spent half his life as a salesman traveling, and then the second half of his life doing the TV and the producing and stuff like that. And he's a lot of what he's done kind of motivated me to do what I'm doing now. So I kind of can relate to what you're saying. Blacky, what about you? Do you have anything that kind of motivated you to get there, or someone that pushed you along the way?
Yeah, well, oddly enough, I didn't grow up with my dad because my dad, when he was a younger man, wasn't a great guy. He spent over half his life in prison. But he's one of those dudes that, flawed, but, you still loved him. You know what I mean? And the few times as a kid that I got to hang out with him, he always made a big impression on me. And then when I was about 18, he'd been out of prison for a few years, and I went and lived with him for a couple of years before I joined the Army, and we, kind of got to know each other and got to be close. And he made a huge impression on me at a very impressionable time in my life, But growing up as a kid with a single mom, I took father influences where I could find them, So I have an uncle named Darren who, he was very influential on me. My cousin Mike was huge, that, they all kind of instilled different pieces of my personality, and then oddly enough, when I got into the Army during basic training, I had a drill sergeant named Drill Sergeant Bezenez, who during basic training, he was really brutal, man. He was, again, I was in the infantry, and so that's, I wasn't training to be a cook, you know what I mean? So they were pretty hard on us, and Drill Bezenez was very hard on us. He didn't like being looked at in the eyes, he was a brutal dude, but for the best, So then when I graduated from AIT and went to jump school, he showed up when I was graduating from jump school because he didn't want any, what he called dirty black hat, who are the instructors of jump school. He didn't want some dirty black hat pinning my wings on me. So he pinned my wings on me, and he was a huge influence on me. He kind of taught me how to be masculine in a weird way, and so, I kind of had to gather my male and my role model influences from various sources. And a lot of my role models were women because I had a lot of strong women in my life, my mom and my grandmother and my aunts and, that kind of thing.
I feel like we're getting into very special episode territory.
Yeah.
I just want you to know this. I feel like we're all about to start crying and hugging it out.
We're gonna pivot right here because I want to share a story with you gentlemen, and this kind of came up from like I said, I did a little bit of research on Cullen. I saw his office tour, and he showed a spinner rack, which I can see there in the background, and that's an old classic spinner rack. So I have a spinner rack story myself. I wanted to share with you guys. I think you guys could appreciate that. As a child, when I was younger, like when I was like 10 years old, I saw that there was a spinner rack in the dumpster of a local drugstore. Okay. And I was like, I want that. I really in the comics. So I grabbed the spinner rack and I put it on my bike and I rode my bike home and I had my very own spinner rack. Okay. Put all my comic books on it, made it look really cool. I was really into comics. I was actually even going to Comic Cons and selling them and stuff like that. So I had this spinner rack in there and it was great. As time got on, my focus shifted to the girls and stuff, and I wanted my room to look a little more manly and stuff, and the spinner rack didn't fit. So for some reason, I decided to take the spinner rack and shove it underneath our house. So there was a crawl space in my parents' bedroom. I opened the hatch, I shoved this spinner rack underneath the house and just let it roll underneath the house. Didn't think of anything of it, moved on. I was 16, 17 years old. By the way, that didn't work. I didn't really get any more ladies coming over to visit, so it was a waste of time. But anyway,
dream big.
Yeah, as time goes on, and this was in the early 90s, my parents end up selling this house. Okay. And I moved out in 94. They sell the house in 96. And I think 3 or 4 different owners own this house and stuff. As I started doing this YouTube, I showed a picture of my bedroom, and then somebody said, "Hey, what's that? A spinner rack?" I go, "Yeah." And I told them the story, and they said, "I wonder if it's still there at that house." And I said, "You know what? I wonder. You know, my parents haven't lived there 20 some odd years, but I could go check." So I literally went over to this house, knocked on the door. I haven't stood on that doorstep since 1996, and this was just a couple years ago. A beautiful lady, a beautiful lady answered the door. I introduced myself. I said, "Hey, I used to live here," and stuff like that. And I kind of said, "Hey, when I was a kid, you know, I put this spinner rack underneath the house." And she said, "Wait a minute." She goes, it was spinner rack. Does that mean comic books?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "When my husband and me bought this house, he saw something underneath the house that said comics." And I go, "Do you mind if I take a look?" And she's like, "Yeah, no problem." So I go in there, and sure enough, I have to go through the master bedroom. And I get there and I look under the house, and I look, and all the way in the corner of the house is the spinner rack underneath the house. And I'm like, it's still there after 25 years. Okay. And so and she's like, "You can have it if you can get it out." So I crawl underneath the house. I get to the spinner rack. I grab it, and I look around, and there's a bunch of apple cores all over the place. And I'm like, why is there apple cores around here? Apparently, some guy was living under our house, and all he was doing was eating apple cores, and I never noticed. And I think it might be the same guy that was living underneath your house,
I was
Cullen.
gonna say, is the same. Maybe we live together, and that guy that used to eat the apples off my tree in our backyard.
Yeah. That last part is false, but I thought it was pretty cool. Everything else is
as
correct.
far as things that an indigent living under your house could leave, apple cores are the best you could hope for.
Yeah.
That
true.
story you said about that was very creepy, by the way, and that left the mark on me last night when I heard it. So
yeah, yeah, no, that's a cool story. I thought you were going to say when the beautiful woman opened the door, just like much like when you were a kid and you abandoned your love of the spinner rack, that you were just going to tell her, "Oh, I'm," just make up some other story and forget about your spinner rack again. Did you get the spinner rack?
I do. I have it. I actually it's at my buddy's house now, but she actually let me have it.
Was it rusty?
What's that?
Was it rusty and messed up?
No, because it had that plastic coating on the metal,
Yeah,
and stuff, you know, so it was fine. It was just, it didn't have the base to it and stuff, but it had the whole spinner rack itself, and I just used a microphone stand to set it on so it would spin around. I will say that's the fastest I've ever gotten into a girl's bedroom. Into her master. I mean, I was within 60 seconds. I was in her master bedroom, but for a whole other purpose. But yeah, I got my childhood spinner rack back. It had been sitting there for 20 plus years. Multiple people lived in that house, and I think it was sold like 3 or 4 times, and it was just sitting there the whole time.
Wow.
But to get that back was really cool, and it's like just a piece of your childhood coming back in your possession. So when I saw your spinner rack, it reminded me of that. And
that's awesome.
Like I said, I really enjoyed your story about the guy underneath your house. It creeped me out last night. So, and if nobody knows that story, Cullen is sitting there at the sink, and he sees a gentleman crawl underneath his house, or crawl out from his house and go and eat apples, then crawls back underneath his house.
Yeah, he crawled out from under the house. I guess I was standing right above the sink window, must have been right above our exterior crawl space exit. And I saw this guy just creep out from under the house. He goes up to the apple tree, picks an apple, and then crawls right back under the house. How old was I? It's pre-kindergarten.
Oh,
based on the house I lived in. It might have been kindergarten, but it was around that time.
And that is why we have all the horror books that we have from you right there.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, gentlemen, this has been fun. I want to kind of loop back really quick to the reason why we got here was your Kickstarter campaign. So if you guys want to just hit that really quick and like let the people know if we missed something on that, feel free to jump in right now before we go.
Yeah, it's Reanimator, The Eternal Lie. It's on Kickstarter right now. There's lots of different pledge levels that you can support. There's lots of cool items that go along with it. There are pins, and
they're even doing like a board game and a trading card.
There's a board game. There's all sorts of really cool stuff. If you didn't read the first volume, you don't need to worry about it because you can get the first volume as part of this Kickstarter. And these 2 volumes tell a complete story. So you'll have the story. I mean, Blacky and I probably want to do more, but this will at least tell you a complete story of for right now, anyway.
Very nice. Blacky, anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, that pretty much nails it. The idea is that, this is a complete story, but it's not the end of the story, so it very much, it much like the first volume, it does kind of end on a cliffhanger, or it like in the old movies, the end question mark,
Yeah.
So I mean, if I could write the book, so to speak, that we would have, another volume, coming sometime soon, but that's going to be more up to the, the success of the Kickstarters,
Well, I'm excited. It looked really good. I really enjoyed reading volume 1. Like you said, there is an option to get volume 1 with volume 2 on the Kickstarter campaign. There's tons of different options. There's original art is on there as well. There's
works and sketch covers and
all sorts of different levels. And like you said, there's even a board game option. And I was looking at the board game, looked kind of fun. So you know what, if you need if you're bored on a Saturday night and need a new board game, support this Kickstarter campaign and get the board game and stuff.
That's
but
right.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate you coming on. Cullen, are you doing any cons or in the near future?
Yeah, well, this week starts my convention season, so I'm going to be in Kansas City this weekend at Planet Comic-Con, and then I'm going to be at Fan Expo Cleveland the following weekend, and then there's a bunch. If you go to my website, which is cullenbunn.com, you can subscribe to my newsletter, and I send out a weekly newsletter. It gives you lots of cool details about what's going on in my life and what's going on in my work and where I'm going to be, because I have a complete convention calendar listed there.
Very nice. Blacky, what about you? You have a website and everything. You have any plans?
Yeah, well, I've got my website is cqshep.com. I don't really have any plans to do any conventions at the moment. I've kind of taken a step back from conventions to focus on getting work done and getting projects out the door and that kind of thing. Now that may change. There's always a convention right around the corner. Like Cullen said, we're coming into the season. I kind of want to get to that convention in North Carolina. What is it? Heroes Con?
Heroes. It's a great show.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about that convention. So, we'll see how things go. I have taken the last couple of years off from conventions, and so the itch is starting to build again, So, I got to fill my hump, as they say.
Very nice. Well,
nobody says that. Nobody. You're the only person that says that.
I think I heard Bill Hicks say it once.
Once was enough. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. I want to let everyone know the Kickstarter link is down in the description of this video. So if you just click that link, go check it out. If there's a tier that you're interested in, go ahead and feel free to support this Kickstarter campaign. It's going to be worth it. Check out Volume 1. Get Volume 2 when it comes out. It's a good series. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And for everyone watching, thank you. And we will see you soon.